Wurt is a very controversial character. Everyone either standing by her being one of the best, or standing by her being very underpowered, with very few people in the middle ground. In this video, I look to end this controversy with a conclusive answer through the comparison of Wurt's methods with those of others. After many experiments comparing the cost and quality of their methods, I think I have reached an indisputable conclusion. Wurt is very underperforming. The short answer is that the methods of getting things done which she unlocks, whether that be defeating bosses, gathering resources, or maintaining oneself, are for the most part simply worse than what you could otherwise be doing. So let's take a look at how Wurt's methods compare to others. But first, remember this video hasn't and isn't going to make a single mention of how fun the character is, okay? That's not what I'm talking about. To start off, merms against bosses. I'll be comparing merms to other methods of defeating bosses, and won't consider the use of cheese strategies. First of all, what needs to be established is that merms take much longer to set up than what it would take to traditionally defeat a boss, making them innately a bad option if you're planning on fighting bosses only once. Because of this, I will be comparing methods that can be used to repeatedly farm bosses. Merms do an exceptionally poor job against bosses with AoE, which doesn't leave many desirable matchups. But AoE or not, merms are frequently outclassed by tentacles via Wickerbottom's on tentacles. They can defeat Bee Queen and Dragonfly just as well, if not better, while also requiring a few stacks of walls and some books, in opposed to the stacks upon stacks of boards and other resources you need as Wurt. With the use of a pan flute, the Eye of Terror and the Twins of Terror can also be defeated. Against the Fuel Weaver, merms struggle quite a lot. Rock Lobsters can do a better job as far as minions go, because they basically never die, regenerate between fights, and are astronomically cheaper. Although followers are problematic against the Fuel Weaver, because they make it hard to kill Woven Shadows. Because of this, catapults are a better option if you need help in the fight, since they not only add damage, but also help dealing with Woven Shadows. Rock Lobsters can also be applied against the Guardian and Nightmare Werepig, bearing similar advantages as mentioned before. Against Claws, merms are actively bad because they can kill his deer and enrage him, causing more problems than they could ever hope to solve. As for Toadstool, the best way to farm Shroomskin is in fact not through fighting him, but through duplicating its drops via knapsacks. So unfortunately you have to kill Misery Toadstool once, which is achieved the easiest with the use of Wickerbottom's bees. Crab King is a boss you won't be farming, but nonetheless, bees are just better at it than merms. And I'm sounding like a broken record, but once again, it's cheaper. Although the legitimacy of bees is questioned, in which case Bunnymen offer a better cheese-free method, since they not only have a higher DPS, but can also be accumulated easier through the utilization of pre-existing bunny hutches. Celestial Champion isn't very compliant with being farmed, but Tree Guards via Woody's totems can kill the boss repeatedly. I'll be the first to point out that this does require maintenance, but you do get a net profit of living logs. Easier bosses such as Deerclops and Bearger can be killed in a million ways, for example with Tree Guards. Abigail and Wickerbottom's bees can kill Antlion effortlessly, and a Beefalo herd positioned on top of a Moose Goose nest swiftly disposes of the boss. This still leaves a handful of bosses that don't like to play ball without the application of cheese, and some I didn't consider important enough to mention. But what remains common between them is that Maxwell can kill them by spamming the Codex, which is about as difficult as using merms and yet again a lot cheaper. I also did some research to see just how many merm guards you need to defeat certain bosses. Bee Queen and Dragonfly took around 20. Not awful, but still more expensive than what you could otherwise use. However, it's only down from here. Fuel Weaver took around 40, so did the Twins when being fought one at a time. Toadstool took about 90, while Misery Toadstool couldn't even be defeated by over 200. Celestial Champion took 120, and even then it was inconsistent, and I got that number after I realized that I can reduce the requirement by 40 merms by leading them away from Celestial Champion's spin attack. These numbers may not mean very much to you, but take it from me that they are very, very, very bad. These numbers are so ridiculous that the merms managed to push each other and the bosses into the water and onto the y-axis. To put it further into perspective, against the Fuel Weaver, merms on average dealt only 400 damage each, which is equivalent to about 7 hits from a relatively fresh handbat. Furthermore, Maxwell requires a measly 18 Nightmare Field to kill the Celestial Champion using his minions, in opposed to the 600 boards required for Wurt. While it is true that Wurt has a one-time investment opposed to Maxwell, the investment of Merms is so costly that you'd have to beat the boss several dozens of times before paying for itself. Note that these numbers were gotten with minimal player interference, meaning they can still be helpful in lower numbers if you yourself fight the boss. That being said, I still stand by Merms being overall extremely bad against bosses. And don't forget that these are Merm guards we're talking about, the strongest variation of Merms, each one coming at the cost of 5 boards, 2 spears, a tentacle spot, and also requiring an alive Merm King. I also ran some tests with Wolfgang's Whistle. It reduced the number of Merms required by about 25 to 33%, inconsistent simply because of how the whistle works. Even with these new numbers, they're still nowhere near cost effective enough to be worth it in the face of the aforementioned options. Not to mention that the whistle comes with strings attached, including the requirement of another player and needing to be close enough for all of them to get the effect. Though, this still leaves one thing unaddressed. Wurt can produce Merm guards through attacking Merm King. This does violate the rule I said of no cheese, but I don't want to ignore something that can counter my argument. This definitely makes Merm guards a much better option for single-time boss kills, but also takes a lot more work if one wants to farm them. Since using Merms that were meant to attack you definitely constitutes as cheese, it would only be fair to compare it to cheese, in the face of which it doesn't fare too well. While you can certainly use Merms from the same houses to beat each boss, this is still more expensive than just using the aforementioned methods on each individual boss. Furthermore, this comes with the issue of needing to gather and travel with them, and they don't even follow you in and out of caves. I didn't cover every boss, and don't forget that the methods I suggested here aren't the only ones. I just brought them up as examples for why Merms are so outclassed. So to reiterate, Merms are many times more expensive than alternative methods, while not even being any better. Merms can also be used to chop and mine. Mining rocks with them is somewhat forgettable, since rocks are pretty limited in the world and the mining isn't done often. Their ability to chop trees is more useful, but pigs can also do that, though Merms are somewhat better, and they can also be used for marble trees. Where this argument really falls apart is that one can simply use Berger, who appears at no cost and does the job better. I made some comparisons between Berger, Wurt, and Maxwell, chopping, shoveling, and picking up the drops of 100 trees, making 3 to 4 tests of each. Wurt performed the worst, averaging 7 minutes and 5 seconds. Berger came in second with 5 minutes and 4 seconds, and finally Maxwell the fastest with just 4 minutes and 23 seconds. Maxwell's reign doesn't end here, however. The previous time was acquired by spawning 5 minions, because the 6th will make him go insane. However, introduce a Bone Helm and the 6th minion is safe to spawn, and now finishes on average in 3 minutes and 39 seconds. You may be thinking that more Merms will put Wurt as first, but that won't help. Wurt's Merms did actually chop the trees faster than Maxwell, but it was the shoveling of the stumps that landed her as the slowest, which is something Merms simply cannot do. However, I did try another method as Wurt. Since shoveling consumed a lot of time, I had the idea of ignoring the stumps and compensating for the missing wood by planting more trees. Now Wurt finished on average in 6 minutes and 44 seconds, with the additional time it takes to plant the trees taken into account. Better, but still worse than Berger. Berger famously has 2 downsides attributed to him, neither of which are as limiting as people think. The first one is Berger sleeping during winter and spring. What's threatening about this isn't the sleeping itself, but the yawn he performs when woken up, which puts the player to sleep. This can be worked around with the use of a Beefalo's speed to outrange the ability, and you can also use a mushy cake. The second one is tree guards. A good solution to this is using birch nuts, because Berger can instantly kill their version of tree guards. You can also use palm cones, but the problem with them is their difficulty to amass. However, using regular trees is still very much possible. Berger can very easily outrun tree guards, and you can intervene with a pamphlet if necessary. All that being said, the best way to go about it is to schedule your wood chopping for the safe parts of autumn and summer. While by no means are you strictly required to do it then, that's when it's the easiest. One can make the argument that you have to wait until the second year for him. So I ask you, what do you need so much wood and marble for in the first year? Only projects that require a lot of wood are making chests, which are more decorative than anything, and making boat bridges, which shouldn't be prioritized for a while. Hammering pig houses give a lot of resources very quickly, which should cover all your wood and rock needs. Marble isn't quite as abundant, but should provide enough for the early game. So between the existence of berger and pig houses, I see no niche for merms. Well, you can open stone fruit with them, but once again it's not my desired method. If you really are that eager to farm those resources so quickly, then you're better off playing Maxwell, who does the job better than Wurt ever can from day one. In the previous test, Maxwell not only cleared the trees faster, but also did it with just the items he spawns with. What about tree guards? In neither scenario do they make a huge difference. In the ideal situation with berger chopping birch nuts, they stand absolutely no chance and are defeated just about instantly, although a small amount of healing for berger is needed, preferably in the form of glommer goop. Maxwell can distract tree guards while his minions continue their job, slightly slowing him down but nowhere near enough to dethrone the king of the constant. As for Wurt, she too can distract tree guards, but it also depends on the number of merms. I don't think Merm King is very good either. He improves merms in combat, but as I already explained, that's an inferior method. He also increases Wurt's stats, which doesn't actually do much. All having higher hunger, sanity, and health does is allow you to wait longer before having to refill them. You'll still need the same amount of resources to fill them, which makes this decent as a quality of life feature, but not much to be said about efficiency. A lot of people seem to consider high health being important, but the difference between having high and low health is needing to heal once every 20 seconds and needing to heal twice every 40 seconds. Not very significant. Wurt can also trade with the Merm King. Trading live fish gives you a variety of items, including kelp, seeds, tentacle spots, reeds, trinkets, and most importantly, gold. Outside of the gold, these resources aren't very helpful, because as I'll explain soon, the food is excessive, and as I explained earlier, the mermagords you'd spent the tentacle spots on are simply bad at their job. Although she cannot trade with the Pig King, you can still use the trinkets with character switching, but it's still not profitable enough compared to just trading with the Pig King. As so many of Wurt's other perks, the reward for going through the effort isn't worth it. Thing is, you only get gold from ocean fish, and not even a lot. Depending on the type and size of the fish, you can get 1 to 6 gold. This compares very poorly to the Pig King, with whom you can get several stacks of gold from a brief ruins visit. And if the ruins are too scary, and this really just feels like rubbing salt in a wound, eels give 5 gold nuggets each. Eels are not only a lot easier to acquire than ocean fish, but also give more gold on average, firmly sealing Merm King as underpowered. Moving on, her hunger. If anyone is unaware, she can't eat meat, but gets 33% more hunger from fruits and vegetables. And when I say fruits and vegetables, I mean fruits and vegetables. In other words, this bonus doesn't expand to things such as honey and butterfly wings. If you play like me, this is a downside. In my Wartox run, I banned myself from eating souls, and with his 50% hunger gain from normal foods, I had to eat twice as much than what you would need with a normal character. I relied extremely heavily on meaty stew, and to a lesser extent a few other meat dishes. The reason I did this was to demonstrate how good meat is. I didn't make any meat farms and spent very little time on collecting all that I needed, while also frequently making hambats. And remember, this was with getting half hunger from all foods. If this isn't a testament for its effectiveness, I don't know what is. So if you were to take away this easy food source and replace it with something better, I would definitely not like it, because then I would have to invest more time into getting food, making it worse with no silver lining. But not everyone has such ease maintaining hunger, and employ farming methods, whether that be bees, crops, or other plants. So for them, the extra hunger is useful, right? Well, thing is, that those methods can very easily produce a surplus. This is not only reflected by people on Discord frequently posting, "What am I supposed to do with all this food?" but is also reflected in the math. For example, To maintain a character without any hunger perks, one would statistically need to harvest just 3 stone fruit bushes a day. 3 is obviously very few, and you'll definitely be getting more than that, so you already have a massive surplus. So look in your fridge burning with food and ask, would it really make a difference if I ate 4 stone fruit a day instead of 6? Another piece of information that's thrown around is that Wurt doesn't need a crockpot, which isn't saying much, because the only character that strictly needs one is Warley. Sometimes this is represented as a product of Wurt's hunger boost, but the truth is that Wurt simply doesn't have any good hunger recipes, and 99% of the time it's better to just eat the ingredients. Furthermore, you're gonna need to make a crockpot anyway if you want to make jelly beans, and no, going to the archives is not easier than just making a crockpot. One of her perks is that fish last longer in her inventory. For every other character, they last 1 day, but with Wurt they last 4. To restore their freshness, you need a fishing bin, which is a structure placeable only on boats and docks. She gets 3.33 sanity per minute while having a live fish in her inventory. It doesn't seem like much, but it's like wearing a top hat without sacrificing the head slot, which is admittedly decent. Now onto the ice bream. The ice bream is a fish which cools the player while held, often said to be a better thermal stone. Though it does last along for Wurt, I'd argue it's actually worse than a thermal stone. With Ice Chester, you can infinitely cool your thermal stone, and unlike the ice bream, it is mobile, in addition to not needing to fish for it during the winter. Also, there's the elephant in the room, which is the caves. There is also the sunfish, which keeps you warm. At first glance, it's a thermal stone that lasts for days, but it only gets worse. First of all, the big catch is that you can only catch them during summer, meaning you cannot even use them in your first winter. So the second winter rolls around on day 91, and you can finally use your better thermal stone, which, mind you, takes a whole 12 hours of gameplay to reach. But at this point it isn't unreasonable to have made several scaled furnaces, rendering the fish a lot less useful than it would have been the first winter. Also, you can't use them well in the caves, since there isn't a way to restore their freshness down there. I think as the world gets older, sunfish in fact get worse. This is because the availability of scaled furnaces becomes greater and greater, while also being more convenient to use since they can be placed anywhere. On the topic of seasons, she doesn't lose sanity from being wet, nor does she drop slippery tools, but spring being a free season is a lie. Being wet reduces your temperature, leaving Wurt susceptible to freezing in early spring, as well as making things rot faster. You can stop the freezing with a sunfish, but being wet ironically makes it spoil faster. Overall, I think her seasonal perks are among her better ones. They demand a lot less investment while providing something that isn't objectively outclassed. Now for some of her more minor upsides. Frogs don't naturally aggro her. This is just about entirely useless outside of frog rains. When a frog rain does happen, then it may be helpful, but any character can easily turn frog rain into an opportunity by having the frogs attack a moose goose or a beefalo herd. If you're not interested in doing any of that, then retreating to the caves solves your problems. Also, frog rain is quite literally raining meat, which she can't use nearly as well as other characters. She can see tentacles which are underground. Any character can do this to a lesser extent by paying attention to their sanity drain, and this ability isn't very useful anyway, since tentacles only attack you if you stand still. She moves faster on marsh turf. Not only does marsh turf cover a small part of the map, but is also made obsolete by the use of a beefalo. It can serve as an alternative to cobblestone if you want the additional speed for a fight. All that being considered, I can't say this is anything more than a very minor upside. She can read Wicker's books. Doing so doesn't actually trigger the effect of the book, but either grants or takes sanity depending on which was read. I personally find clothing to be a sufficient source of sanity, but it can serve as a good source if more is necessary. However, it's not very good during boss fights because of its long animation. Wurt is often credited with having good late game perks, which I entirely disagree with. The idea is definitely there with the premise of accumulating merms, but they still just aren't good enough. You could build dozens and hundreds of merm houses and have a merm king, but for what? Gatherers that are just a downgrade, Fighters which are easily outclassed and inconvenient, a glorified hound defense, a worse method of farming gold, and useless bloated stats. Even if you invested all the necessary time and resources to make her as powerful as can be, she is still frequently outclassed by things that take a fraction of the effort. So what's the point? You're putting in more to get less back. Okay, those are the numbers, but how does it play out in reality? Well, I have tried my best to find a single instance of the character's perks being applied in a meaningful way that isn't just a downgrade of something else, and I have failed. All you can find are videos of Wurt killing this and that boss on high day count worlds, which isn't impressive given that other characters can do the same thing with a lot less effort. There are also a few boss rushes as Wurt, which speak more against the character since they're undeniably at the worst end of the spectrum compared to the creators of their runs. As such, the numbers are reflected in gameplay by the sheer lack of impressive achievements. That being said, I would really like to see an optimized Wurt run, perhaps even a run where building worm houses ends up beating all the better alternatives, though I doubt such a thing is possible. What I'm really trying to say is that I'm open to being convinced that the character's actually good, but that would require a real game demonstration as the evidence is too far piled up to be beat by words alone. So given how overwhelmingly both evidence and the numbers indicate her to be underpowered, why are there so many people that think of her as being strong? I think it stems from people not knowing just how poorly she compares to the better methods, or being entirely unaware of them. You see, everything advocating for the character conveniently makes no mention of them, but if you are aware of them and compare their performance, it becomes abundantly obvious that Wurt simply isn't good. In conclusion, Wurt can absolutely use merms to beat bosses and collect resources, but they consistently do a worse job while also coming at a much steeper price. This ultimately makes merms irrelevant and investment into them an active self-sabotage. This leaves Wurt with a few other minor perks, most of which do very little all things considered, so this character featuring small tidbits of actually helpful abilities comes at the price of being locked out from the best source of food, the best source of gold, and 2,700 schools.